So, Allison, you prefer to go by Allison or Allie?
I love going by Allie. I always say it's only my parents that call me Allison, but that's not even true. They call me Allie as well. So Allie is great.
So if you're like getting in trouble, it's like Alison Hernandez.
Yeah, I guess it's been a while since I've heard that that tone from my parents, thank God, but that's right.
So you're a Canadian, just like me, eh?
Yeah, I am Canadian. I was born in Toronto at North York General Hospital. Lived in Canada all my life. Yes.
Oh, okay. And so the commonality that you and I have, at least one that we know of so far, is our attraction to Florida and having kind of both and in our lives.
hmm
So wherever you want to start, like how does Florida fit within your lifestyle?
Yeah, absolutely. It fits into my lifestyle a lot of different ways. I mean, I have a history with Florida. So, growing up, um, my grandparents had a place there. My aunt and uncle had a place there. My parents loved visiting there. So, we would trek down there for a couple weeks at Christmas, sometimes a couple weeks at March break, and whenever else we could. Um, and Mostly just those two times. My
Hmm.
dad was a huge fan of doing it in the car, so we didn't fly. We would always drive, and I still have a piece of my heart that loves those road trips.
How
So
often would
yeah,
you do
from
those
like
road trips?
how long?
How often
How
growing
often?
up?
So every time we went, so at least once a year, and then sometimes more than that. Nowadays, I do that road trip as many times a year as I can. People think I'm nuts for not flying, but I don't know. I like it. My husband likes the time on the road, and I think I got introduced to it young enough. So,
Hmm.
it's just a piece of it's easy for me.
Yeah, I like that. I like the road trips. I have just similar personal memory, but we used to go to Chicago. My aunt
Okay.
on my mom's side lived in Chicago, and just every year we would go there and those road trips listening to like my parents' old music, like
hmm
ABBA and like the Letterman and like 60s and 70s music. So there's that. That was Chicago for me. But in terms of Florida, how is it for you? Like after you, presumably you don't do as many family trips with your parents as much anymore, but you continued that tradition on your own.
Right.
Was there a time where you didn't do that, and then you're like, you know what, something's missing in my life?
Actually, yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I stopped traveling back and forth there with my parents. I was probably, I guess, 16 or 17 the last time we did it, and then it was off to university and not really around to do those family trips, and we didn't really do them again. After that, I had gone to meet them in Florida and flown a couple times in between that time and I guess into starting to get into my 30s, um, or 20s, 30s. But then, yeah,
Mm.
you're right. It was later, once I was married and later in life, and I was like, I really miss going down there. And, we still have the family place there. My grandparents left it to my mom. My grandfather's still alive, but he doesn't snowbird anymore. It's just a bit much at his age. So that place is there. So I figured, if my parents aren't using it, we'll use it. Um, I guess if you want a little more detail on that, it was during COVID when my husband and I were like, man, we got to get out of here. Like Canada is just dark, it's cold, it's gray, it's locked down, it's very depressing, and so we need to escape. And that place, my grandfather had not been in for a year and a half at that point due to travel restrictions and worries about the pandemic. So my husband and I, who I work remotely and he was working remotely at the time, thought, let's just go. So we spent a couple months down there, um,
Hmm.
and kind of
So
just
wait, before you jump
there
into
for a
that
bit.
part of the story, because I do definitely want to dig deeper into that.
Sure.
So just prior, so when you say COVID, was that 2020, 2021?
So I mean, COVID hit in 2020, and we endured, I guess, a full year of restrictions before in early 2021 we got the itch and we were like, we gotta go, we gotta
So
get out of here for a bit.
just prior to that, you weren't going to Florida on a regular basis for a few years?
Not road tripping and not for significant amounts of time. No, we had gone every couple years at least, for a weekend here and there. I'd gone to meet my parents down there for a weekend here and there. My husband and I flew a couple times just to be there. My husband grew up in Florida, and so I've got that connection to the state as well. He was born in Mexico, but he was raised in the Fort Myers area. and left
Oh, okay.
as a teenager. So he's got a lot of roots in Florida too. So we would travel down there, but not in as significant a way as we do now since COVID.
Mm-hmm. And so what was this realization? So you did a year of lockdown, rolling lockdowns. I remember that. I was like, holy smokes, is this really the new normal? Are we going to have to just deal with not interacting with people? Like everyone's got cooties kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what was it for you? What was that breaking point where you said, we got to get out of here, and at least for a short amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the isolation didn't hit me as hard as some people because I already was a remote worker prior to COVID. I worked from home 5 days a week, five, six, seven, whatever. And so being sort of cut off from the workplace didn't feel as big of a change to me as it did to some, to many other people. But I think what was getting overwhelming was we hadn't traveled obviously at all in over a year. And so getting that little stir crazy, even without a pandemic, you get stir crazy when you don't travel for a long time. I think a lot of people do. And then it was just also, I don't know, in Canada, COVID was just everyone just loved talking about it, thinking about it, arguing about it, posting articles about it. Like I was just kind of tired of COVID being this all consuming theme. Um, and, from what I understood, there were other parts of this beautiful continent who were still kind of living their lives and talking about other things. And so Florida was
Mm-hmm.
one of those, rumored to be. And so we thought, okay, well, it's winter now. It's nice there. We have access to a place there that we can stay. And it's there's no reason, like, let's try it. Let's see if maybe it'll just kind of get us out of this rut of kind of being at home in the dark, in the cold, thinking and hearing about COVID 24/7.
Do you recall what some of those rumors were? Like, what was the objective image that Canadians had of Florida? I know there was a lot of negative and like
Yeah.
crazy stuff, and like I don't know if you heard the legend of Florida Man and like some backwoods Florida rumors. Like they got gators and they play with, like, people in Florida are just crazy. Like, what were some of the impressions that you had, or what are the, because I know you had experience growing
Yeah.
up there, so you knew kind of the real deal, but amongst your circles or just what the algorithms were feeding you, what was your impression of Florida during these lockdowns, these multiple rolling lockdowns in Canada?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I mean, Florida Man, that I think is its own thing. That's just like a fun sort of exercise. You would, type in your birth date and type Florida Man and then see what happens. It comes up with a news article that some crazy Florida man did something on your birthday or whatever.
Yeah.
That's fun. I mean, part of that is, sure, Florida's quirky. Like it's got a lot of different things going on. You've got the Everglades there. Like there are gators, like gator focused incidents are going to happen. And sometimes they sound absolutely ludicrous to us because we do not have gators hanging around here. So there's that. But I mean, more seriously though, I think a lot of what was people thought, Florida is being very irresponsible with COVID. They're giving too much freedom. They're not locking people down. Everyone's going to die. There's a lot of old people there. They don't care about them. Their governor is crazy. And that was the kind of things that I was hearing and reading. Without getting all, political and contentious about this, because I'm glad that those conversations are in the rear view at this point. I just disagreed. I thought that Canada was a little too iron fisted about the entire thing. I felt that I guess the balance between public safety and personal freedom was just it was way out of whack, in my opinion,
Yeah.
in Toronto specifically, where I live, and in Canada as a whole. And it seemed as though Florida had a bit more of a measured approach. I'm not a statistician. I didn't really look into what came of it. But what I do know is that Florida's economy thrived. And as a state, they continued to do very, very well. They continue now to do very, very well. And, in Canada, we're still suffering a lot of economic and societal issues that even our leaders will still attribute to, COVID. So,
Isn't that interesting? Let's talk about that for a quick sec, because I can appreciate you don't want to get too much into political talk, but I can tell you're not an extremist, so feel free to voice your opinion or what have you. We're just two buddies talking.
sure.
In the beginning, I was on the same boat. Being Canadian, I'm like, I was telling my wife when they declared the pandemic, I said, we should just lock down for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks max. Just everyone completely locked down,
Mm-hmm.
get this thing under control, and that'll be done. But the thing is, not everyone did that. And there was more the consensus, especially here in Florida, because I'm in Orlando, as you know, is that they locked down for maybe 3 weeks, and they're like, you know what, we got to get people out of the house and start moving. And I was like, no, we didn't fully lock down and eradicate this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? Maybe my theory would have worked if everyone just really sheltered in place for a good 4 weeks and then just really got the whole thing. But in the New York Times app, I remember this being so isolated, they would show a map, like a heat map of where the most COVID cases reported were in the country. And at one point, Florida State was like bright red, and everything else was like getting to be pink and white in the Northwest. But then over the weeks, you could see that wave of red spreading from Florida to the rest of the country, which was like, oh shoot, Florida kind of just forced everybody to get into the herd mentality. Like they're just like, let's just lean into it. And then that's to your point. They were like ahead of the curve where the economy was thriving. I have a small business, kitchen remodeling. People sheltering in place, I guess, were like looking at their kitchen and said, if I have to be here, might as well beautify my place because I'm not spending money on vacations and other stuff. So there was kind of like a mini boom in home improvements. But to your point again, from your perspective in Canada, how are you seeing the attraction of Florida, the economy wise? And then I want to get a little bit into your remote staffing and tell us about that.
Sure.
So again, from your perspective, from then till now, what's been your impression of Florida?
From then until now? Well, I mean,
and how the whole thing was handled.
Sure. I mean, my impression of Florida hasn't really changed much. And again, like, not a scientist, not a statistician. These are my opinions, and maybe they're wrong. But I really thought that the effort to completely lock down absolutely everyone, whether that be for 2 weeks to flatten the curve or 4 weeks or whatever, I thought that was misguided. I think it's impossible to lock down so effectively that nobody will catch the flu. Like, we have first responders that had to keep working. We have essential services that have to stay open. There are also inevitably always in a free society people who just won't comply. And I think that that should have been acknowledged in the putting together of a plan. I think, ideally, great, like, let's lock everyone down and keep them in their house, and after 2 weeks it'll go away. Maybe, would it have? Maybe not. But is that a realistic way to try to combat this? I don't think so. And so I always thought, Florida is ripping off the Band-Aid, and like, I think that's how it's going to go. And because they ripped off the Band-Aid, from my perspective, they recovered very quickly. The fact that they were able to maintain some of the comforts and freedoms that people are used to a higher extent than some other states, and here, I think, won a lot of favor for their governor and for their government by the people. Because in the end, the result was the same. Most people got COVID, most people survived. And so the ordeal that people went through was really the only difference. And so I know, looking back and thinking, well, we had less of an ordeal than people in Canada or people in, northern states, I guess made people happy. That's my perspective.
And then, so in 2021, you and your husband were like, okay, what was it? Was it feeling cooped up? Was it just like, what was going through your minds and your decision for spending your first extended stay down in Florida?
Sure. Well, I've wanted to move to a warm climate since I was a child. So that's always been a goal of mine. My husband likes the warmth too. We're not big winter people. I know some people in Canada thrive in the winter because they love to snowboard and ski and snowshoe. We're just not those people, unfortunately. So love a warm climate. And I figured, well, we're both working remotely. We're stuck inside all the time, and it's dark and it's gray. Like, there's no reason not to go work remotely somewhere that might just be a little more fun to be in right now. It was really like a why not situation, right? We have somewhere that we can
Yeah.
go and stay for free. It's not going to be that costly for us to do this. We don't have any children. We didn't have any pets at the time. There was no reason to not just relocate for a bit and hope that things would get a little more bearable here in Toronto. Again, it was really just the political discourse was getting extremely tiresome,
Yeah.
extremely divisive, like extremely angry, and we just didn't really want to be a part of it anymore. And our understanding from others, friends and family who had gone down to Florida was, hey, you should come down here. Nobody cares about COVID. No one's talking about it. You can just enjoy yourself. So.
And I can corroborate that. It was because I still see all my social media feeds, all my friends and family in Canada, and the complaints. And it was like, I was just kind of being quiet, being like, ooh, I don't want to stir the pot. But like, it's kind of, well, also, I don't commute on a regular 9 to 5 basis here as well. And we have our own businesses and,
Sure.
and so forth. So a little bit of a bubble within the Florida lifestyle as well. It's like, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of that. And that's a lot of what I've found, Ali, is the media overhypes things too. And I want to get your take on that, having experienced it for yourself, because I'll put out ads for like a free webinar and then get these trolls who will make these negative comments about Florida, about, Ron DeSantis, it's the worst place in the world. Why'd you do that? And, most of those people have not even visited Florida, have no interest. They just have nothing better to do. In that sense. And oftentimes I'll go to Canadians who have more of a sincere concern about the political climate and this and that and how the handling of the pandemic was and the governor. But then I also flip it around and say, does Justin Trudeau represent you 100% perfectly?
Right.
And they'll say, well, hell no. I'm like, well, that's what the rest of the world thinks, is all Canadians are Justin Trudeau lovers because you elected him president. But they don't know the details of, like you said, it was in the middle of the referendum was during the pandemic, and so it was all kind of stacked. And who knows? Don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. But then when you came down to Florida, was it what you had expected? What you had heard the rumors were? Was it accurate? Was it inaccurate? Any surprises? Or
yeah, it's interesting.
Was it surprisingly accurate?
It's interesting hearing your perspective as someone who was actually in Florida at the time, because I wasn't surprised when I got to Florida, but I was almost shocked because it was such a major culture shock. So if you were in Orlando or if you were in Florida for the entirety of COVID, I guess you might not have felt the full weight of exactly how heavy and despairing it felt to be here at that time. Especially as someone who disagreed with almost every move that the government was making. It was really very disheartening. It's putting it mildly. And so while I expected Florida to be different, I'm aware of their politics. I align with the most part, generally, with their politics as a whole. As you said, no one ever represents your opinions 100%, but I knew what to expect. But, in going from Toronto, where if you forgot to get your mask on before you got all the way through the vestibule and you had people sort of swearing and screaming at you, and then getting off the plane in Florida and going to the state fair. We literally went to the state fair when we got off the plane. And it was like people were just enjoying life. And they were eating corn dogs. They were going on rides. Like I gotta say, I wasn't surprised, but it was a significant culture shock. That whole day we were kind of just in disbelief because, a year and a half of a certain every day, the same grueling thing all the time. And then to just experience the exact opposite when you kind of feel as though that exact opposite doesn't exist anymore or will never exist again, was pretty significant shock to the system, even though logically it wasn't a big surprise. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like when I went to the Philippines for the first time as like a grown-up, my first impression was like, oh my gosh, there's so many Filipinos here. It's like, well, yeah, what are you expecting? It's like going to China and saying, why are there so many Chinese here? It's like, well, hello. Yeah. But it's another thing to actually experience it and be like, oh, it's wide open. I just like it was saying on the news, it's wide open. So for you had that, how long was that stay in like 2021 when you and your husband drove down?
Almost 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so let's dissect a little bit. How is it that you're able to do that? You work remotely because you and I were talking prior to this about some of the elements of being able to have the best of both worlds. We're not here. I just want to make sure to reiterate, we're not here to dump on Canada or Canadian politics or dump on Florida or Florida politics. But for each individual, I truly believe you can have the best of both worlds. It's just a matter of what your balance is.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So to be clear, that time that we were there for almost 3 months during COVID, we actually did fly that time. Since then, we've been driving, but we chose to fly. It's not an important detail, but I thought I'd just mention it since you said drive. But yeah, so I mean, like I said before, I've been working remotely since before the pandemic. So I'm the chief operating officer of a company called Staff Shop. We're a staffing, consulting, recruitment firm. We're based in Etobicoke, but we service clients across Canada with a couple in the US and the Caribbean as well. It's really great. Women-owned, Indigenous-owned organization. My business partner, who's our founder and CEO, Jennifer, she's a rock star. She's awesome. And when she started the company, it was always her vision to have that freedom to work remotely. We saw a lot of inefficiencies where we came from and, the traditional office setting that really made a case against forcing people into an office. You can only hire talent if they live near your physical location. That really cuts down on like hiring the best people available for a job. People sitting in a commute in the morning would show up to work already frustrated, already exhausted, already unfocused. It costs a lot of money to rent an office space. People can't curate their own space that they work in to the same extent to their own comfort level as you could working from home. And there's a host of other reasons. I could write you a whole dissertation on why I think remote work is so fantastic. But I'm lucky enough to be partnered with her and working for her. And she's just always been a big believer in this model. So I was.
And so what's the company name
Staff
again?
Shop. Yeah.
So Staff Shop, staffshop.com.
Staffshop.ca. All one word.
.ca.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find us on Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn and wherever else you are. So that was kind of my key to being able to do this, because I was already working remotely. We already had great systems in place. It wasn't an adjustment during COVID to have to try to figure out this remote work situation.
And just as an aside then, the Staff Shop, did you say that they focus on or specialize in finding remote staffing solutions?
No, not necessarily. All types of staffing solutions. So we service all kinds of industries, all kinds of roles, from like admin, HR, IT, legal, even general labor, sort of light industrial types of roles. Hospitality and events is a big one for us. Really anything. Like, we can fill roles in any area, some remote, some in person. But the magic is, unlike a traditional staffing firm where, we kind of haul people into an office to present their resume and sit and have an interview, we have a much more diverse and widespread candidate pool, again, across the country, with some in the US and the Caribbean, because we do everything remotely. We are very remote enabled. We're very remote forward. We conduct all of our interviews remotely via video. We still get that same sort of in-person, face-to-face. We have great online tools to do all the vetting steps that you would need to qualify candidates and things of that sort. But it's been a pleasure to approach it in that way, and especially seeing where kind of staffing came from and sort of the generations before us. Being able to do it this way is fantastic.
And so that I think is key to being able to have the best of both worlds. Like, it's hyper specific. Canadians who are interested in visiting and or living in Florida on a regular basis, but being non-location specific with your income for you. And that's quite interesting, because from my perspective, my solution for step one is to be able to have a business down here that you can also manage remotely. But your solution for yourself, which also is a nice reminder, is that you don't have to necessarily start up a business as long as you can work remotely. I think that's why a lot of people, there was a huge influx into Florida originally, because people were able to work remotely from home and they came up to a very similar realization. It's like, well, if I'm working from home, all I need is email, internet connection, and a phone line. I can do that either sitting up here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada from home, or I could be in the exact same time zone in Florida and still be able to be on the same clock. It's just there's palm trees outside my window.
Yes.
So for you, that first 3 months, how did that go? Was there any new realizations about like how you wanted to be able to have both Florida and Canada in your life going forward, or was it just really par for the course for you?
Yeah, no, it was definitely a realization. I mean, I think I fell back in love with Florida in a much more significant way, being there for so long, right? So, like, being there for more than 2 months, we had to start to find all of our daily life conveniences there. And so, I found a hairdresser that I love that I still want to go back to, and she's my favorite. And we were attending a church down there, and so you start to build like a few of those connections that show you like, I can see this as a life and not just a quick vacation spot type of thing. And so during that trip, we both, my husband and I were both like, oh, we really got to find a way to spend a lot more time down here, if not move here full time. Um, and so we may move there full time at some point. That's definitely an option. We have a few ways that we can easily make that happen whenever we're ready. But for now, being able to just kind of head down there whenever we want has been great. We were actually just there in December before Christmas for a few weeks, just because we can and we love it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So beyond being able to have remote work, being able to jump on a plane, half a day's worth of travel, or drive down, but maybe an hour, a day and a half worth of travel to drive down. Beyond that, is there any other pieces of advice you can give to people to be able to have both and instead of just choosing either or? Do you know what I mean by
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Well, I mean, it's going to be different for everyone, but the biggest, I guess, concern would be, the cost of accommodation, right? So the place that you're paying for, presumably to live in Canada, uh, is it is it manageable to increase that amount that you're paying to live, right? Because you could presumably double it if you try to maintain two properties. We're lucky enough to have, access to a family home that is completely paid off and that is, whenever my parents aren't there, it's vacant. We just take turns using it basically throughout the year. And so that's a major advantage for us.
Mm-hmm.
If we had to deal with, two simultaneous mortgages or a mortgage and rent, somewhere else, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, but you have to be a little bit more strategic, I guess, with the way you handle that. And, I've seen lots of different ways to do that, whether that's, having a property that you live in sometimes and you rent it out at other times of the year or whatever that might be. But I would say if for people who are trying to kind of be in two places at once, so to speak, that's the thing that you got to get sorted out. And I'm sure that you have lots of resources on how to navigate that, and there's lots of resources available on how to navigate that, but it's gonna be different for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And since you mentioned that, it's pretty simple. Simple to understand the concept, but not necessarily easy to
Right.
implement. But like you said, have a property down here in Florida that you can use for yourself and then rent out to others when
Mhm.
you're not here. So at least that you're not carrying both mortgages, both the Canadian mortgage for your primary home as well as another mortgage in the U.S. Well, when you're not here, that property in Florida could also potentially pay for itself just by having a few short-term vacation renters, or maybe other snowbirds renting it when you're
Mhm.
not around. And just like with real estate in general, you have a tenant and or guest who's helping you pay those expenses and pay down that mortgage. But for you, remind me, what's your location of choice that you often frequent
Sure.
down in
So,
Florida?
growing up, we always went to Madeira Beach, which is in the St. Pete Clearwater area. It's right just north of Treasure Island, which is just north of St. Pete's Beach, to get sort of more and more broad in terms of a reference point. So that's where we go most frequently. That's where I love. Again, my husband is from the Fort Myers area, which we do visit sometimes, but my heart is in Madeira Beach for sure, or at least in that the general area. It's Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater area.
Yeah. Well, so why is that? Why does Madeira Beach have a special place in your heart?
You know what? I think it's the best of all worlds. So, it's close to two airports for one, well, three airports, I guess. Like you can get to Orlando Airport, Tampa Airport, or the smaller St. Pete's Airport, all of them within less than an hour. Which is huge. Again, we drive most of the time, but it's not just about the airport, it's also about having a hub nearby. Tampa is a very big city. It's got all the resources you could possibly need. St. Petersburg itself is actually quite an up and coming city with lots of the resources you might need as well. I'm a city girl, so here in Toronto, like I live in the city. I like being able to have access to, nice restaurants and, finding the things I need shopping wise or resource wise, having my choice of, clinics and salons and whatever else it might be, but then also being close enough to nature and to the beach that you still feel, that you're living that kind of vacation-ish type of life. And so I really think that accomplishes all of those things, so close to the city, but even just it's sort of in Madeira Beach proper. You've got Gulf Boulevard that stretches, from, north of Indian Rocks all the way down to the end of St. Pete Beach. And it's a beach town. It's a beach strip. It's kind of that little beach life with all the cute little shops and bars and things that you would expect. And then it's also got, the national parks there too, like Fort DeSoto Park is there. And when you're there, you just feel like you're a million miles away from any civilization, even though you could get into the heart of St. Pete's downtown and within 25 minutes from there. So it's really that juxtaposition geographically. I think that's fantastic. It's also St. Pete's itself has a fairly young population as compared to the rest of Florida, which isn't saying much because we know there's a lot of retirees all over Florida. But St. Pete's itself is, again, like there's a lot of sort of young professionals and young families. And so it just makes it all the much more vibrant culturally and just in terms of like city life in general.
So what would be like a typical day in the life when you came down or when you have an extended stay? Like the first little bit, I guess I'm imagining, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of like vacation mode. But then when you are familiar with the area, you kind of know your place. When you settle in and you have like a daily routine or a weekend routine, can you give us a glimpse as to how you do that? Like, what would a typical day or week in the life when you're having extended stay look like for you guys?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm lucky because I can, with my job role and the way that I work, I can kind of curate my daily schedule however I want. I don't have to be, for example, parked in my desk from 9 until 5 uninterrupted and leave at 5. I can, set up my meetings when I need them and do my kind of deep work whenever I want to do it. And so, whereas when I'm in Toronto, I will kind of do that sort of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. type of day. But in Florida, I don't want to waste the daylight, right? So I'll usually get my deep work done in the morning, take a very extended lunch break, and during that time, absolutely spend it outside. Go for walks if I can. The beach is very close, fortunately, to the place where we stay, so I can walk there or drive there. Walk there in 30 minutes, drive there in 5. Get out, stretch my legs, and then when the sun goes down, finish doing some of the rest of the work that I have to do. So leaving that kind of administrative stuff that no one's waiting on for after the sun's already gone, so that I can make the most of those like nice afternoons. So that's how I would curate my day for the most part. I also find when you prioritize getting outside, it's just so much more healthy for your body, right? Like you end up just getting more steps, you get more fresh air, you get more vitamin D. And so even if you're not specifically saying, I'm going to go for a run or I'm going to go work out or anything like that, even just the act of forcing yourself outside several times a day, it just does wonders for your body, your physical well-being. Yeah.
Nice. So I kind of want to go rapid fire a little bit with some of the final questions, but we'll see, because I wanted to give a fair shake as well. Don't want to make it just a poo-pooing on Canadian life kind of thing. So what's the best of both worlds that you appreciate? So let's start with Canada and what you love about Canada and living in Toronto, and then contrast that with, well, also Florida, Madeira Beach also has this. So what's the best of both worlds for you?
Yeah, best of both worlds. So, I mean, and I don't mean to poo-poo on Canada either. I'm a very proud Canadian, born and raised here. I think the number one thing for me that I love is my family is here, my roots are here, I'm a Canadian girl. Like there are just some cultural nuances of this country that I love that I would just absolutely desperately miss if I wasn't around. The way people talk, the way they interact with each other, some of those things that you can't even really describe to someone unless they've lived here. I think that's important. Um, I may not be a super big fan of the government we have right now, and that's a great reason for me to run away more often than not to Florida when I can. But that doesn't mean that as a country as a whole, I don't absolutely like believe in this country. Like you'll actually see behind me in my office, I've got the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Bill of Rights there framed on the wall. I love Canada. I love what our
Oh,
country
wow.
stands for. I absolutely do. So, it's my roots, it's my family. And then, of course, in the summer, our weather is better than in Florida. It's very, very, very hot in Florida in the summer. I don't mind that. My husband can hardly tolerate it. And it's just kind of a lot of hiding in the air conditioning from the outdoors. So I think, the snowbirds have a real good reason for
Right.
doing what they do. You get the best of both, the weather like throughout the year as well. So, on top of having cultural roots here and again, like Toronto's an amazing city. It's huge. There's so many people. It's so diverse. It has so much to offer. Um, Everyone's got their own thing, I guess, that they look for in a city where they want to live or where they want to spend time. But it's
And hands down, I love the food there in Toronto. That's how you and I
yes,
originally
on
connected.
food.
It's like I noticed Kanji Queen in the
That
background,
yeah.
and
You
then
know
I
what? I do
posted
have
that,
that one complaint
and you're kind
sometimes
enough to
spending
help me.
time in Florida. Like I just can't find good dim sum. That is a problem for me. So
Yes.
I'm sure it's there somewhere. But yeah, like Toronto's food scene it's a product of the diversity, of course, of the city itself and just the sheer size. But I think, yeah, culinary wise, Toronto kind of takes it over St. Pete's or Tampa, hands down.
Yeah. And then the St. Pete, Madeira Beach area, what does that have that you don't quite have in
You
Toronto?
know what's interesting is that Canada has this reputation for being so polite. Oh, Canadians are so polite. They're so polite. I think whoever came up with that is not from Toronto. Toronto is vibrant, it's energetic, it's passionate city, but it's not super polite. It can be pretty cold. People are quite on guard a lot of the times. And so surprisingly, I find the Madeira Beach, St. Pete's area, the people are so warm. The pace of life is a little bit slower. Um, the emphasis on interpersonal interactions is so much higher, and I just find people so friendly and like eager to have meaningful connections with each other, which you kind of find missing in a big city like Toronto. And I think a lot of big cities experience that. It's not just Toronto, but I think that's a huge difference that I notice for sure.
It's ironic,
It is.
eh? I'm so conscious of using a now, but it's so ironic, eh? Because, growing up in Canada, I didn't come down to Florida as much as you did, it sounds like. But through the media, you think all Americans are loud and boisterous. And when the kids go backpacking through Europe, they put a Canadian flag because they don't want to be targeted as the rude Americans. But coming down here and actually living here for an extended period of time, I'm quite surprised. There's actually a lot of nice people. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, of course, not everybody is the
Sure.
caricature that you see on television, but people are actually really nice. And no, not everyone is a Ron DeSantis lover. Just like in Canada, not everyone's a Justin Trudeau lover. So you have your own experience. Um,
Yeah.
and but then going back to one last tip about Madeira Beach, is there any like little known local hotspots, or if you ever find yourself in that area, you got to give this a shot? Do you have any insider
Yes,
tips
I
that you
will
can
share
share
a
with
couple
us?
with you in a moment, but I just wanted to say one more thing on the Americans being polite or not polite thing. I heard it put very well recently, and I can't
Yes.
remember where I read this. It was an article or a travel blog or something, but it's not that Americans are rude. It's that more so than anywhere else in the world, Americans really wear their heart on their sleeve. They are highly uh, open with their emotions, which is why you get this incredible warmth and hospitality, but also like this incredible volume when things are not going well. And so I think that that's how I heard it put, and I thought that was really, I don't know, cute, interesting. It's anecdotal, maybe it's real or maybe it isn't, but I found it very accurate for the experiences I've had at least. So anyway, I thought I'd mention that. Um, yeah, but in terms
Love
of
it.
really great places, I mean, there's the quintessential touristy places of Madeira Beach, like John's Pass Boardwalk and Village, of course. That's where everybody knows about, and it's famous when you go there. Um, it's not a hidden gem. But what I would say is when you're there, don't waste your time with going to like, the Hooters that's got the beautiful rooftop patio, or the Bubba Gump that has like all the seating. Like you can go anywhere there. You can go to those restaurants anywhere. Um, but on that boardwalk, there's a little tiny place called the Paradise Cafe, and they have the best lobster roll I have ever had. It's fantastic. Florida's not hugely a lobster place, but you can find it. It's a seafood, culture. And so try the lobster roll at the Paradise Cafe for
Yes.
sure. There's also a sort of fast food, not a fast food, but more of a quick serve joint called Aloha to Go. And they do, it's actually a female owned company. They have 3 locations in that area, and they do Hawaiian food in their own Florida style. And there's one in Seminole, which is pretty close to Madeira Beach, where we go often, and it's awesome. I've been to Hawaii a few times. I love the food, and I like to support, women-owned business as well. So that's a place that I would send people to for sure. And then my final one, I think 3 is a good number, is right in downtown St. Pete's. Well, you know what? There's one in downtown St. Pete's, but there's another sister location in Ybor City, Tampa. So you have to go a little further into Tampa proper. And I would say that location in Tampa is better. It's called the Copper Shaker, and it's a bar, like a cocktail bar, but it's really cute. Everything's in copper. The barmen are wearing the suspenders, and the women are wearing like the little bustier. It's very kind of old school, and they play live swing music almost every night. And so it's a really great vibe. Their chef is phenomenal.
Cool.
Their cocktails are absolutely so well curated and so good. That's a really good date night spot. So Ybor City, if you're feeling up to Tampa, and then, St. Pete's location if you're feeling maybe a little less ambitious.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And now we've got it recorded, so we can always go back to there and be like, for me, selfishly too, I'll just go to my wife and say, hey, we got to check out these places. That's part of the fun of doing these podcasts as well. So Ali, thank you very much. Once again, if people wanted to reach out to you about anything that you talked about, where can people reach out to you? What's an appropriate place?
I think if you wanted to contact me through the company, through Staff Shop, you can find us on Instagram. Staffshop.ca is our handle. On Facebook, we're facebook.com/staffshop.ca as well. You can find our website, staffshop.ca. If you send an info there, one of our admin assistants can get you in touch with me. And then if you're looking for me on LinkedIn, I would be under Alison Hernandez. Type in Toronto keyword, I should come up. And I'm pretty good at responding to my LinkedIn's pretty quickly. So I think those would be the best spots.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your insights and for getting this unique perspective. I'm so happy that we're able to have this conversation, actually have it, recorded and having other people being able to get a little bit of a sneak peek as to, how real people are having the time of their lives, being able to balance the best of both what they love about Canada as well as their own little piece of Florida. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That was a lot of fun. Appreciate it. All right.
Bye-bye. Take care. Till next time.